All right, looks like we are getting started and people are coming in. Awesome. Great. Great to see everyone come in. Hello. Hello, everyone. Right, we'll wait for 2 more minutes, and then we can get started. Meanwhile, while we wait for others to come in, everybody feel free to write your name, which city you are from, what company you work at, and what your role or designation is in the chat box. That will be great. If you can add your introductions there. Hello, Avash. Nice to see you. Hey, Valentina from Argentina. Awesome. Hey, Kimberly. Hey, Kate. We have folks from multiple different cities, different industries. This should be a fun one. Awesome. Super excited for this. Awesome. So welcome everyone, to this EngageWith series of webinars. We are doing, a series of webinars on, which will be super important for, people teams, HR teams. These topics will kind of range from, how to effectively onboard new hires, all the way to feedback, performance reviews, OKRs, how to build diversity and inclusivity in your organization. And today's topic is creating a feedback-driven culture at your organization. And the guest joining us for this fireside chat is Felicia. So Felicia, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate your time. If you could, add a quick introduction for yourself, what you have done, and then we can take it from there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to do this webinar with you, Nisarg, and I've been looking forward to it. And so just to give you a little bit about me, I've been in the industry for over 16 years. I right now run my own HR consulting firm called CPO Playbook, and I work with the executive teams to basically go through any type of strategy that they have for their business, small, medium, and large. The largest company that I've worked with was with WPP, which was 100,000 employees spanning every country imaginable. And so has just had some really awesome opportunities in my career to bring performance and succession planning and total rewards and people analytics, talent acquisition, like just together from a very systems approach. And I love this stuff. I love feedback. I think it's so essential to culture. And so I'm really excited to chat with you about it today.
Awesome. Yeah, and just a quick introduction about me. I'm Nisarg. I lead product at SpringWorks. So SpringWorks is an HR tech platform products company. So we make a lot of products around employee engagement, background verifications, and all of that. Would love to talk more about that later, but let's focus on feedback today. So thanks everyone for joining us. I see a lot of introductions coming in. And then hopefully we'll see a lot of questions coming in for you. So, but before we kind of get to that, would love to start with, we talk about feedback a lot. Obviously, the role of feedback has also changed, over kind of multiple years. But why is it important, to have, first of all, a culture of feedback, an open culture of feedback at an organization? And why should it be the people teams or the HR team's responsibility to run this feedback process?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think understanding the value is kind of the first step in any type of implementation of any strategy. So I have about 4 different really critical ways of how building a feedback culture really impacts the business. So I think first and foremost, it saves time, money, and resources. Feedback creates layers of transparency within and among within teams and cross-functionally, which allows us to move quickly and adapt to continuous changes of the work environment. The second is that it generates a lot of data. So feedback creates a powerful learning culture. The qualitative data that we can collect gives us the ability to learn quickly and with rich knowledge of next steps. And it's really important to capture that feedback data in some sort of tool as well. The third is that it creates a growth mindset and increases performance because of that growth mindset. So the more we learn, the more we realize we're not perfect, and which can humble us, and we're more likely to be better listeners to our colleagues. And then lastly, it enables better work relationships. We all have something to share and contribute in the workplace. And when we're pushing, for our own agenda, we often forget to listen and contribute to others. In a feedback-rich culture, we're inclined to listen and iterate to be more collaborative, and therefore increasing trust and relatability with our colleagues.
Yeah, amazing. Kind of, all 4 kind of huge points. Would love to kind of discuss all of these in detail. And we'll take a deeper dive in each of these 4 elements. And so before we get all of this feedback from the peers and from the organization, what is the best way to ask for feedback, right? To get the most out of the feedback process?
Yeah, great question. I think first I want to preface that when you start asking for feedback in a culture that's not acclimated to it, people might look at you and ask, what's wrong? And did something happen? Because it's not normal. So with that being said, I think asking for feedback is quite an art. You have to consider the relationship you have with the person that you're asking, when you're asking, and what you're asking about. If all the stars align, then I would say something like, hey, I just finished this communications draft. I'd love to get your eyes on it before I send it out. Or I've only been with this organization for a month now. How do you think I'm getting on? Is there anything that you suggest, since you know the team so well? And so really emphasize why you want the feedback and why you believe that they're the expert to give it, and then keep asking. So make it a normal part of the conversation as you continue to build your relationships throughout the business.
Got it. And then obviously feedback is a two-way street, right? You ask for feedback, basically you request feedback from others, and then you're also giving feedback all the time if you have a very strong kind of culture of feedback at your organization. So, what are some of the best practices, to take care of, when you are kind of giving feedback as well as receiving feedback?
So at the organizational level, you're really thinking about the executive team. It's the CEO and the senior leadership team that will make the greatest impact culturally. They need to create a space for psychological safety by encouraging people to speak up and have a process to do so. It's not about asking every person in your organization to speak their minds all the time to everyone they know. It's about saying, we genuinely care about your thoughts, and here's how we're going to hear them. So having that executive buy-in in place and having it consistent and having executives actually be role models to what feedback might look like and how it's accepted and how you react to it, it will trickle down all the way, to the bottom of obviously the entire organization across and up and down the business.
Got it. And then most of the times I see, when the HR team or, the CHRO goes to the management and says, okay, we want to, establish this process of, this feedback process. Like we want to make it more open. We'll get, great feedback. What are some of the resistances that you have typically seen that, the senior management have?
Yeah, I mean, most of the time, when you're trying to implement this culture of feedback, most management will say, well, we want others to give feedback, but they don't actually do it themselves. And that is, that is the space where, HR kind of comes in and starts to coach. The CHRO or the executive, head of people is really in place to coach the CEO and the executive team, and then obviously operations of the business. But at the heart of it, you could put every process in place and never see an inch move culturally if the CEO and the executive team are not on board and modeling the behaviors that they want their people to model. So so how do you kind of deal with that resistance is really making sure that you're bringing forth some of the challenges that the company's having around the progress that the business wants to have because feedback is not being implemented. And so really tying it back to business goals is what the executive team is going to care about. And when they see, oh, I see how this is going to impact, the progress of my business, I want to participate. If this is what that means, if this is what that means. And sometimes it just takes, it's some massaging. It's just not like a night and day difference.
Yeah. So, and then, most of the times what I have seen when I talk to, senior executives is they have an opinion, okay, we do a performance review cycle, right? Which, happens once a year. How is this feedback mechanism different from that performance review? Right? Because a lot of HRs do come back to us and say, hey, we already have a performance review system in place. It's a great, tool to get us 360 feedback from, their peers and managers and, give out feedback as well. But how is a regular, feedback different from these performance reviews that happen once a year? If you could shed some light on that.
Yeah, I'll give you a quick example. So first of all, if you're doing a performance review once a year or even twice annually or quarterly, that, that's a formal review, and you should never be surprised what's going to happen at that meeting. It's more of a, here's what we talked about throughout the last quarter or 6 months or year. And so if you are an individual contributor and then you have your manager, and your manager might be, frustrated with something that you did or didn't do, you're just going to continue on that path without that transparency and feedback from your manager for the next quarter, 6 months to a year. That doesn't make you successful. That doesn't make the business successful. That doesn't make the team successful. So you'd want to be able to receive feedback often, ask for feedback often. And in a cultural, of rich feedback, it becomes this normal exchange. And something I'll talk about a little bit later is like, it's like a golden nugget of, oh, I'm learning, and it becomes a learning culture as well. So I think that, it's a very, very different space to be in. Performance reviews are a summary of what has happened, not a surprise nothing should be brought, no new information should be brought at the performance conversation.
Yeah, that's actually a great way of saying that. Because I remember our CEO, Karthik, he often mentions this, that, the performance review that you receive should never come to you as a surprise. Right? So that should, if there is something negative in it, or something constructive for you to improve, it should already have been talked about either in a 1v1 or in some async kind of fashion. So that feedback should already have been given. And this actually has a huge impact on the employee's psyche as well, right? Do you want to talk a little bit about that as well? That when you get something out of the blue during the performance reviews, right? You are getting new information during a performance review. How is that different, and how regular feedback can help eliminate that? If you have something to talk about, yeah.
Eliminate what exactly? Can you repeat
So eliminate the feeling of surprise, right? Because if I'm reading that, okay, I'm not up to the mark during my half yearly performance review, it can leave some negative impact on an employee, right? And then the feedback process kind of helps eliminate some of that. If you can talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think that in a performance review, the key is to uplift and support every person that's in the performance review. And the way you do that is when you have the review, assuming that you've given the feedback already, you guys should be talking about, hey, here was the negative or constructive feedback is the way I like to phrase it. Here was the constructive feedback. Let's talk about the progress that you've made since then. Like where were you before? What did we talk about that was a solution or solutions that we've tried? How are they going? How is it working for you? Are you feeling more confident in your role that you can do X, Y, and Z? And so that becomes like more of the center versus, hey, this is what you did, and therefore you get, a -1 or whatever, the case may be.
Yeah.
Whatever the criteria is, it's really about, let's talk about how I, as a manager, can support you in the progress that you've made since that feedback was given, right?
Yeah, awesome, makes sense. And then this can also, help kind of address conflicts and misunderstandings, having an effective feedback process, right? So how can instant feedback or a quick feedback help resolve that, like resolve conflicts or misunderstandings within the team?
I think having, there's different times of feedback that are of how they're given. There's like real-time feedback. There's like a wait for a breather and then give the feedback. It depends on like who you're giving it to and so forth. But to resolve these conflicts and do it quickly, I think it's really important that in a feedback-rich environment, you're able to say, hey, like, let's come together and chat about what's not working, or here, I have some ideas. One thing that I wanted to bring up today, which kind of relates to this, is that I was watching this amazing video that I came across, and it was about, the secret to giving great feedback by a cognitive psychologist, Leanne Renninger. And she was on a TED Talk series. And she explains that in a Gallup survey, only 26% of employees strongly agree that the feedback they get actually improves their work, which is pretty dismal. So what this tells us is that the quality of feedback is much more important than the cadence. And although the cadence is also important, the main reason to give feedback, why feedback is unsuccessful, is because one, the feedback giver might be too direct and it leaves the receiver as defensive. Or two, the feedback giver is too soft and indirect, and then the receiver becomes confused. So the focus, and kind of tying it back to the question around, how does it solve conflict, is that having a really good methodology of giving good quality feedback is the key, not necessarily just how often we give it. Right. And so there's this 4-part formula that she shares, which I absolutely love. And it's about giving, either constructive or positive feedback. And so the four-part formula is first, the micro yes. So a question that you ask the receiver that lets someone know you're about to give feedback, but it always allows them to opt in. So for example, hey, I have some ideas for how we can improve things. Do you have some time to chat? You know, it's a way to kind of allow someone to accept the feedback and be willing to say, hey, yes, I'm good with you giving it to me. The second is, you know, you share a data point. So share specifically what occurred instead of saying, you're really unreliable because of X, Y, and Z happened. You could say, hey, you said you would send me that email this morning, but I still don't have it. The third step is sharing impact. How did that occurrence impact you? So for example, because I didn't receive that email this morning, I don't feel prepared for my meeting with the leadership team this afternoon. And so that brings in your perspective and not necessarily the truth. You know, feedback is all about perspective. It's not the truth. And that's really an important distinction. And then finally, the wrap up. It's wrapping the feedback up with a question. So you could ask, do you see things differently? Or do you have suggestions on what we could do differently? You know, and this creates a commitment versus compliance. And people are more likely to commit to their own suggestions. And so that part formula that the psychologist shared, I thought was so critical and so important, because this is really where feedback becomes effective, not just, hey, let's give feedback to everyone all the time, and that's okay, and that's our culture.
Yeah, 100%. I think the impact piece of it is the one that most people miss. What I have seen is in unsuccessful implementations of feedback process, it revolves around what you did wrong and not what the impact of what you missed was on the business or on the overall aspect. So that's actually a great takeaway. Focus on the impact while giving feedback. Amazing, awesome. And then while we're talking about how to give that feedback, I would love to understand from you in a professional setting, how can we, or how can HR teams ensure that while giving feedback, it is given in a way that is respectful, it is unbiased, and then it is kind of sensitive to the diversity and kind of inclusivity of everyone in the workplace. Primarily, how do you remove bias from feedback?
Yeah. So I think that first and foremost, HR teams should be able to provide, the tool set, or here's how, or here are the sensitivities, and like just creating awareness of, hey, these are some phrases, these are some words that either we could use or maybe we shy away from, and creating awareness for people, because most of the time people don't know that they're implementing bias. And it just comes from not being aware and not being told. And historically, we haven't had a lot of that. It's just mostly been in the last few years that we've been really bringing that DE&I factor to the surface. And so it's really important for us as HR professionals to ensure that we're making people aware of what's being said, and hey, here are some alternatives of what we can say, or here's what we should be mindful of in this type of conversation. Having a deep sense of empathy. I mean, that empathy is one of the skill sets that I would say makes or breaks any manager. And by doing that, it's because if you don't have empathy, then you really don't have perspective. And having perspective of your teammates is critical to success as a manager. So with that being said, I think being able to implement and integrate DE&I strategies within, for example, how to have a performance review conversation is going to be much more effective than a separate unconscious bias training, if that makes sense, because it's integrating how things should be done in a regular process that the company has.
Yeah, 100%. Makes sense. And once you have built this system of feedback, which is inclusive, which is unbiased, and kind of takes care of all the important things while you are kind of giving feedback. How do you move to kind of measuring effectiveness of the feedback, right? What is it that can help the HR teams or people who have implemented the feedback process understand that this process is effective, or help them identify areas of improvement?
So I always like to collect both qualitative and quantitative data.
Mhm.
So let's talk about quantitative first. Quantitative data comes from surveys. An annual survey, doesn't make a huge difference. I mean, it's great that if you have an annual survey, that's awesome. But it doesn't make a huge difference unless it's being used as a gateway to like biannual or quarterly surveys. Organizations move too quickly for annual surveys to be relevant once solutions are being implemented. However, in your survey, items such as I received quality feedback to perform at my best with a Likert, like a 1 to 5 Likert scale, will help measure how well feedback is being given. And then of course, an item on cadence is also like a great indicator. And then you can see that progress over time. Qualitative data comes from focus groups as needed, but ultimately interviews with HR business partners and function leaders should have plenty of insight to what is really going on in the organization. And this will help tell the story of how the quantitative data shows up and provides clarity on how to improve. So that combination of being able to tell the story with the quantitative data and the qualitative data is, the qualitative data will say, here's why we're seeing the quantitative data, behave this way. And so those, I think, should be consistent, right? I mean, HR business partners, stakeholders, function leaders should always have a pulse on the business, and then bringing all of that data together to tell that story on a quarterly basis or biannual, even an annual basis. Any type of basis would be great. I mean, I know a lot of businesses who don't even do surveys, and they're allergic to them. So, it's a lot of, here's how we measure. we don't know for sure until we measure. It's a science, and we have to kind of treat it that way, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah, before I move on to the next question, I have an interesting question from an attendee. So they ask, how do you recommend balancing the need to document feedback, right, for smaller companies? So where, they easily get overwhelmed by a lot of forms and documentations. They already have to own all of that. And then you add on top of it, the need to document feedback. How do you recommend balancing it? Do you have anything?
I think when I was an HR business partner, I had consistent meetings. They were on the calendar, and it was consistent meetings with either managers or function leads, like depending on, what the structure is of your business, like who you would meet with. So for example, like the head of people, I would always meet with my executive team members one-on-one, either once a week or twice a week, or even if it was once a month, I'd be happy. But having those meetings just on the calendar, it helps you, say, okay, I'm going to dedicate so and so much time to operations, work during this week, but I'm going to keep showing up to these meetings just to check in with the business. And that is your collection of qualitative data. And you should always have like a pulse. Now, I think some challenges to that is leaders don't really see sometimes these meetings as valuable. And you have to actually, get buy-in to have these meetings, but most people will. Most people like to check in with their HR business partner. There's always something going on that they need, to bounce ideas off of with their team. But at the end of the day, we have to take the initiative to say, hey, like this, it would be really great to meet with you. And let's just put this cadence on the calendar. And, if it doesn't, if you don't feel like you need it, we can just cancel this week. And, you have to be really flexible with the business because you don't know what's going on in their world, at least the details. So I would continuously have some sort of cadence with the stakeholders of the business functions that you're supporting or the regions or the level of business that you're at, and make sure that you always have this pulse on the business, and that becomes your source of qualitative data.
Amazing. And great question. I hope that answers your question. And why I kind of brought this up is because this was a perfect segue into kind of the next question, or the final set of question that I had, which was why is it important to have a dedicated tool to get feedback or to generate feedback, and then what you should look for when you are kind of looking for a tool to implement to get feedback from employees.
Yeah. So the tool captures your data. If you don't have a tool, it's really tough to measure anything. I mean, once your organization grows to over 50 people, you're in deep water, because there's no way that you're going to be able to collect the detail of feedback that you need to actually make good decisions. So you should have a tool, I think, over 50. I mean, I know companies that are at 30 and they're struggling. And it's not a good use of your time. A tool allows you to be much more efficient in data collection. I think a couple of features that I like to see is one is the ability just to post anonymous feedback. And the reason being is because not all organizations have that psychological safety just yet. They might say they do, and they don't. It takes time. And so having just that anonymity, I think, is really important, at least in the beginning, and maybe forever. It just depends on the culture of your business. So having that as an option, I think, is really good. And it's a good gateway to maybe more visible feedback. The second is the ability to request feedback from managers on specific skills. And this ties back to, sharing a data point when you're doing that 4-part formula of giving feedback. It encourages that behavior of getting more specific with your feedback, which I really like. And so when you're able to ask your manager about skills instead of, hey, can I just have some feedback on this project? It's really about how you did the project, because you're not going to have the same project every month. You're going to have different projects. And so it doesn't really help to get feedback about the project. You should be getting feedback about the skill, because the skill is what's going to sustain or increase your performance over time. So those, I think, 2 features would be really valuable.
Amazing. I actually just launched a poll right now asking folks, if they currently use any tools, and then almost 25%, 30% said they don't use any tools right now. It's mostly docs, and then 20% still use, and the majority are looking for tools or looking for better options. Let me actually take 5 minutes. I will, so like I said, initially we at Springworks make HR tech products, and one of the products that we have made, EngageWith, is employee rewards and recognition, as well as a feedback platform. Right, it's a great tool. It integrates directly on Slack and MS Teams to enable your employees to give feedback. So let me share my screen and walk you through how easy it is to give feedback. So this is my demo workspace. And I would love to get some feedback from you as well, Felicia. I think you are seeing this for the first time, how the tool works. So like I said, it integrates directly on your Slack and Microsoft Teams. I'll show you a demo on Slack, how it works. So all employees have to do is, they'll find this EngageWith as an app over here. They have to click on My Feedback. And then over here, click on Send Feedback, right? There are two types of feedback that you can send. One is a direct feedback. A direct feedback is typically for either your peers or for your manager, right? If you want to give feedback to your manager, you can do so using this tool. So let's say I want to give feedback to Ankur. I can select what is the category of feedback I want to give. So obviously these are customizable. And these are the 4 that we have right now, but we'll add more. So let's say I want to give feedback on communication skills. Let's add one more thing. We'll say problem solving, right? Once I've selected, I can select whether these are, whether I want to give a positive feedback, like, tell them, hey, this is something where you can improve, but problem solving is a strength for you, right? Because while it is important to give feedback on where you want to improve, it's also important to, kind of focus on what your, good areas are where you should double down. So with EngageWith, you can mark strength and improvement areas as well, and then type a message here. Whatever the message you want to send as a feedback to Ankur. So this can be, great work. Do an example here. And then, add kind of more constructive thing. You could improve on the cadence of communication emails, right? This is something, like a post-project implementation feedback that I want to give Ankur. And then, I can send it anonymously. Right? Super simple to send. As soon as I send it, he'll get a message from EngageWith on a DM, and then I also get a message from EngageWith that my feedback has been sent to Ankur. And this can be done anonymously as well as not anonymously. A reason to do this through EngageWith is so that you can have a list of all of your feedback again directly on Slack. So here you can see all the feedback that you have sent, and then all the feedback that you have received as well. You can see here. And then just one last final point I want to highlight is the organization feedback. And this is something which is very popular amongst our users. Through this feature, you can set up feedback in a way that employees can voice their concerns or opinions on organization goals to the senior management or the HR team directly. Either it can be public or non-public. All of these settings can be managed by the admin, but it can be posted publicly as well. So let me show you a quick example. Let's say I want to send an organization feedback to the HR of the company, saying we should add more PTO days, right? Who needs less PTO days? So this is just one of the feedback that an employee might have, and then they want to post it. So they can use this feature to anonymously post it publicly, right? So all I have to do is mark that I want to post it publicly. As soon as somebody sends, I am the admin, so admin has the right to allow it to post publicly or not. So as soon as they click post publicly and then hit post, the public feedback will get posted, right? So I have integrated it to my general channel for now. So that's why it is adding over here. So here you can see we should add more PTO days. It came up anonymously. Then the HR team can come in, they can start replying here directly, or other employees can also reply to this anonymously in the same thread, right? makes it, very simple, and then this kind of becomes your public AMA channel for your organization. So a very neat feature, that we recently launched, and our users love this. So just wanted to highlight this for a bit. Let me move back.
I love that you integrate it with Slack.
Yeah.
And the reason is because most feedback tools, the challenge is getting people to use them, to just adopt. And they're all really great tools, but unless they're being leveraged and used, it's really tough. And there's a lot of strain on the HR team to get people just to use it. But I think the adoption, in the integration of like the day-to-day work, like the adoption absolutely will be like more likely to occur and increase when it's through a tool of where we work. And so just meeting people where they work at Slack, I think it's really helpful.
Yeah, and that was one of the main reasons, why we built this, because when we were talking to people, like different HR teams, one of the biggest challenges, like you said, was adoption, right? They do use different tools, HRMSs offer feedback mechanisms, the HRIS that you can use Google Forms, but because of the Slack integration, they saw much higher kind of engagement, because everything was on Slack. So great. Awesome. Let me, move on to some audience questions. Again, an announcement to everyone. Feel free to use the question and answer tab to post your questions. We'll go through them, now, and then Felicia will answer them and add her opinions and thoughts on it. Awesome. So Kate Kilduff is asking, is there a database for the best surveys to go out to employees? Yeah, I think there are lots of databases available online. We will share it, after this webinar as well. But Felicia, if you have seen, some kind of important kind of pulse surveys databases that have list of all the surveys that you've seen, feel free to mention them. Yeah.
Like a database of items for the survey?
Yeah.
Okay.
Like what type of questions to ask in the survey? I think that's the question, Kate, right?
Yes. So normally the tool that you select will come with some items and suggest items depending on what you're trying to measure. So if you invest in a tool that most likely will be coupled in with what you purchase. But another just, free tool to look at some items is SurveyMonkey. And they have a ton of items to find. I mean, you really want to be intentful and thoughtful because, surveys can get up to 100 items very quickly. And you want to measure everything. At least I do. I want to measure everything. But the point is, right, exactly, is like, it's just to be very focused and intentful. And sometimes what you would want to do first before you pick your items is get a sense of that qualitative data and understand what are the general challenges of the business, and then use the survey to figure out how big of a challenge that issue is. So it's not necessarily to initially find out things about the business. You want to get a pulse, get some qualitative data, and say, here are some things we're hearing from the business. We want to see in a survey which one is the most challenging to the business, and then the top 3 things, that's what we're going to focus on in the next 3 to 6 months.
Amazing. Yeah. Spot on. And then also EngageWith solves for pulse surveys. So if you want to check it out, we have a huge database of pulse questions, and then again, like I said, directly tied into your Slack or MS Teams workspace, so employees directly respond from there. You should definitely check out EngageWith for that as well. But let's move on to the next one. So Maddie asks, what should we do if we are concerned about annoying staff by constantly prompting, to get satisfaction feedback? Right. basically, I think what she's trying to ask is, how do we not annoy employees, by constantly asking them to give feedback?
Yeah. So it's a great question. But that is one of the biggest challenges. Again, I think if you're trying to move to an organizational culture, it's going to be at the executive level. When people see that the executives, that the leadership team is requesting and asking and saying, here's what we do as a company, this is a value for a company, more than likely people are going to be more encouraged to participate in giving and receiving feedback. But also the manager level is a huge driver. And so encouraging managers and being able to say, hey, managers, your responsibility as a manager is to ensure that everybody is being given timely, constructive feedback. And that could essentially get baked into like OKRs or whatever goal creation that you're, system that you're using, but it should essentially or eventually get baked in and say, hey, on the survey, people, 25% of people feel like they don't get good quality feedback to do their job. You as a manager, it's your responsibility to get that number up next quarter. And that's going to get tied to your reward system.
Yeah, and also it's a great way to hand off this to the managers, because at the end of the day, it does help managers hit their goals, right? If they're able to give feedback to employees on their OKRs and KRAs, if they are able to get feedback from their team, I think it's a great way for the manager to improve and the team to grow overall as well. So while it should still be, the process and everything should be owned by the HR or the people team, it's important to, leave the actual execution and the discipline of it to the managers. Yeah, 100% makes sense. That's a great point. Awesome. I hope that answered the question, Maddie. So Kelsey Hopstad is asking, what are some ways to increase felt safety? Or for those who are automatically respond to feedback with "oh no, what's wrong," right? How do we help them see the value of feedback?
Yeah, I think the first, like, there's ways of introducing feedback to an organization. It's not a light switch, right? When the organization invests in time to ensure that people feel psychologically safe to share feedback, I think one way you can do that is implement a speaking up session. Depending on how large your organization is, it would depend on how often and where you do this, but a speak up session could be like a monthly 30-minute meeting, and it would basically be an open opportunity for anybody to come and participate and be in a meeting and just say, speak up on anything that you want. We're here to learn, we're here to understand, and bring all of your bad ideas to the table. We want to hear them, because a lot of times people don't speak up because they're afraid that their idea is bad. And so if you say, hey, like, we just want ideas and we don't care how bad they are, who has like the worst idea, and make it, kind of fun and exciting for people to say, hey, like, something's been on my mind and here's a way to do it. And I think that when it, like, that is in itself is not a way to help people have psychological safety, because they still don't trust that you're going to act on those ideas that they have. So what you have to do is that if you're going to have a speak up session, you need to share your results. You need to share your circle back and say, these are the, here's all the ideas we have. We're going to come back next month. We're going to share, the first part of this meeting will be, here's all the ideas we had, and here's why we didn't do them, or here's why they weren't a priority. But this one was really great, and this one led to X, Y, and Z. And so here's the solution we're putting into place. And so really being able to communicate often to your people is super key, because that is what's going to help you build trust and relatability and give you the power of persuasion and really, changing behavior in the business.
Awesome. I think the next question is also along similar lines, right? So they ask for workplace cultures where almost all of the team meeting feedback is positive, or it's all about praises or shout outs. How do you recommend creating the psychological safety to embrace sharing mistakes, errors, and challenges? I think what you just mentioned covers that as well, along the similar lines. But yeah.
Yeah, very similar. Again, it comes from the top. I was working as an intern long time ago at the Center for Creative Leadership, and I'll never forget. There was an executive coach, and I asked him. I said, "What makes a great leader?" And the first thing he says was, "A great leader is someone who allows people to make mistakes." And I think that is a key to help cultures shift from "I don't want to make a mistake" to "let's fail fast and work together and move quickly." So really that value has to be set, like the tone of that value has to be set from the top again. So with that being said, I think that when you introduce what's called a growth mindset to helping people realize that feedback is a golden nugget, and only with golden nuggets will you learn the fastest. It becomes a value that the organization will try to embrace. So all of that communication and that, maybe it's like, once a year, twice a year training around growth mindset, or even a growth mindset in your onboarding experience, where anybody who comes to the door is going to understand what growth mindset means at my company. And that growth mindset theory is about, without feedback, it's really challenging to grow fast. And so we embrace it. We want it. I'm not doing you any favors by not telling you, you're not committed to my growth if you're not giving me feedback. Like, it's kind of very similar to like, if you're in a conversation or in a meeting with someone and someone, shares something and you can't really hear them and nobody really says anything. But if I'm really committed to hearing what you said, I would say, "Hey, can you speak up? I really want to hear what you said." And calling on someone to say, "I'm really here for you. I'm here to support you in your career and your success. That's why I'm giving you the feedback, not because you made a mistake."
Awesome. Yeah, it really helps create that environment. Amazing. I love this next question from Krashal, and this is a question from my side as well, because I have faced this as well. How can you give feedback when the person receiving is not receptive?
Do you want to answer it first?
Oh, I was just saying this is a question from my side as well, because
oh, you have the question? Okay. I wanted to give you the opportunity. Okay. Yeah. So I think first you have to really understand the person. It's really challenging to give feedback at all to anybody without having empathy and perspective of where they're at and what they're doing and what's on their mind. So I think first and foremost, understand the person and what they need first before giving any feedback. If the person is not being receptive, I would say hold off on giving feedback, build a trustful, relatable relationship with them first. If you don't have that relationship, it doesn't matter how good your feedback is, how often you give it, the quality of it, it will never be received well because they don't trust you yet. And this is this is an occurrence that happens with everybody in the business. It's happened to me several times, and I realized I just needed to take a step back, build that relationship, cultivate it, go out to lunch, have a good conversation, learn about each other on a personal level, and then their walls will probably start to crumble a little bit. And then once that feedback is given, once you get to the point where you feel like you can ask that micro yes question, then that's when you can say, really empathize with them and say, I'm really here for your success and I want you to be successful. And that's my job. And that's why I want to partner with you and figure out how we can, better this process or better this situation, whatever that might be.
Yeah, amazing. I think, yeah, I'll try that. One thing that, I mean, has worked for me before in a similar situation is kind of flipping the, narrative. So instead of, giving feedback, I would flip it to, ask them, give me feedback on how I am as a manager or how I am as a peer. And then that is a great way for them to start opening up, about and then when you are receiving feedback, be more of, accepting of that feedback, and then it sets a good example for them to how to receive feedback as well. So if you are a good receiver of feedback, that can set a good example for them as well. So just something, has worked for me once before. Could work as well. A good model to have.
Mr. Rugg, I think that's a great strategy.
Yeah, awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, another question from Natalie is, what are some tips to create an open culture to get your direct reports to feel comfortable providing feedback to you as their leader? So kind of along similar lines. But yeah, how do you kind of, kind of remove that power dynamic of a leader and their reporting, and then make an open culture so that, employees feel open to give feedback to you?
Well, a couple tips. So one of them is a monthly team meeting. And at the end of each meeting, say, hey, anybody have any ideas of, how I can help support you in what you're doing? In your one-on-ones, if you're not having them, start them. Managers having one-on-ones is probably the biggest, most important thing that they can do for their team. One-on-ones could be anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour weekly. If you're not used to this, have them monthly, warm up to it. But at the end of the day, in those one-on-ones, you can always ask for feedback at the end, 5 minutes at the end of that conversation. Hey, we've talked a lot about how I can help you, or what I can do to support you and what your progress is. I think that's great. Anything else that I can do for you to support you? Is there anything you want me to do differently? And just get into that habit of having that conversation be very normal in your one-on-ones or in your, monthly group sessions, and always, continue to ask for feedback, I think is a good tip.
Awesome. Yeah. We'll take one last final question and then, end this. So that is, what do you see as HR's role if an employee wants to share feedback with another employee, but has chosen to go to HR instead? Or should they, be sharing the feedback directly with them?
Great question. So I think that it is so important at the manager level to implement kind of like a invisible rule. This invisible rule is to say, as a manager, well, first of all, HR's role is to coach managers and to train managers. And so I think part of that coaching and training should be, hey, John, as your manager that you're supporting, if any of your team members come to you, you ask them to pause. Like don't ask them to share anything. And the first thing you say is, have you gone to this person and talked to them about what you're feeling? I think that the managers who allow, people to come to them for challenges and problems, once the manager has heard the issue, there's a bias into what's going on. And so if you say, hey, stop, first go to that person, unless it's like an illegal activity, then definitely tell the manager. But if it's like a conflict or a challenge that people are having, help managers empower their teammates to go together and resolve the issue first. And then if it can't be resolved, then meet with them, the manager and a couple of people can meet together. And so HR's role is to really empower and coach the managers and the leaders to help their teammates resolve their issues in a way that makes sense and help, and like the manager's role is to help them say, here's how we give feedback, and reiterating, why we give feedback, how we give feedback, and also be a role model on their own. Because if managers continuously allow employees to come to them, then it's a lot of hearsay, it becomes very toxic. It becomes who gets to the manager first to tell my story, that so-and-so is doing something that I don't like. So really, implementing a strategy or a training, or, here's how you as a manager are to, go through this process, is to really empower your team to solve and resolve on their own without having to hear about the situation, unless it's illegal activity. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. Thank you everyone for your questions. We did have a lot of them. We are just up on time. So just some final kind of announcements. First of all, thank you so much, Felicia, for joining us today, talking about feedback, sharing your expertise, talking to all the attendees as well. Secondly,
awesome.
Yeah, awesome. We run community of of HR folks and people leaders on Slack. Felicia is also a part of it. It's called The Shape of Work. I sent a link in the chat. Feel free to sign up. We have more than 1,800 members and people leaders in this Slack channel. And then people just post about challenges in the role, or how do you improve in the role as well. So a great community to be a part of. And the next webinar that we're doing kind of as a part of our series is employee surveys, right? How do you how to curate surveys for employees, employee satisfaction surveys, pulse surveys, and then how do you make sure that you're receiving responses and kind of increasing the participation as well. Because our biggest challenge that we have recently come across is the employee participation in surveys is low. Right? So how do you make sure that participation rate is high? So we are going to do that next month, to the exact date, 23rd of March, 1 p.m. same time. Srijit will share a link to register over here. Let me see if it is up here or not. But it will also be part of an email that we'll send right after this webinar. So feel free to sign up there. And then, see you all next time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was so great. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. And please connect with me if you're a participant. Find me on LinkedIn. Happy to connect. And hopefully everyone will be able to go back to their organizations and implement a stronger, feedback culture.
Awesome. Yeah, amazing. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks, everyone.